A topic that's in front of all of us today in ministry is the topic of burnout among pastors and leaders. Several years ago, my father-in-law was writing his dissertation, and his dissertation covered the topic of burnout in ministry. And after surveying hundreds of pastors across different denominations and networks and having a third-party group analyze the information and then provide the data based on the survey, he came away with the three top leading causes for burnout in ministry. The first was a lack of peer relationships, meaning that pastors that didn't form relationships with other pastors, and especially across denominational lines, so cross-pollinating relationships, were at a higher risk of burnout. The second cause of burnout that he discovered was when pastors try to constantly and consistently operate outside of their grace. In other words, they're always trying to be all things to all people. So if you put that kind of in a fivefold ministry context, they're constantly trying to be the apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, and teacher all the time, which we know none of us are. And then the third reason for burnout that he discovered was unfulfilled dreams and vision, meaning that the vision that God had painted on their hearts for that church and community, it just wasn't fleshing out and it wasn't happening. And so that's really been on my mind recently, particularly as we've come into the new year in 2024. I always try to look at HGM and just what's going on and where we are. And I've begun looking at our core values. And our core values are relationships, resources, and results. And I began placing those values right next to these three leading causes for burnout. And I saw something. I really saw how HGM's values provide the answers for these three causes of burnout. But here's something we have to understand about those three areas of burnout. So often we try to attack them just one at a time. Well, we're going to just focus on relationships. We're not going to focus on outcomes. We're not going to focus on resourcing. We're just going to focus on relationships. And that's as foolish as focusing on outcomes at the expense of relationships. Because here's the thing with these three areas of burnout, they're like three legs on a stool. If you remove any one of them, you're going to wind up on the floor. You're going to crash. So the reality is that we have to deal with all three causes simultaneously and at one time. And that brings us back to just our HGM core values: relationships, resources, and results. And so often I think we look at our values and we look at them as just singular units when really they need to be viewed together like three legs of a stool that work together simultaneously and then help one another over time. What does that mean? That means when I build relationships with other pastors, that begins to move me out of a place of isolation. And then that moves me into relationships where then I can glean from God's grace on other people's lives. And I can be resourced, not just with tools and techniques and skills and playbooks, but I can also be resourced by the grace on their lives. Personally, I'm not a fivefold evangelist. I'm not the guy that can get up and share his testimony for 5 minutes and 50 people get saved. That's just not me. But what I learned in my peer learning community within HGM is that when I get in the room with other leaders who are graced differently from me, then I can glean from the grace on their life, and it helps me be a whole lot more effective within my context. So we start in relationships, we move through resourcing, and then we get to the place of results, that place where that dream and that vision begins to come alive and live and breathe. Why? Because we're not trying to move forward from a place of isolation, but we're working through that in conjunction and in collaboration with other people and other leaders. It's really a beautiful thing. And so I'm really excited to just be able to see the fact that God has given HGM with these values and the tools and the relational opportunities through peer learning communities and the small churches can make a big difference resource, and really everything we do that they can be the answer and a solution, part of his answer and solution for those three areas of burnout that leaders face. So with all of that, what keeps us from engaging? What keeps us from really leaning in and taking advantage of this? A couple of weeks ago, in early January of 24, a group of leaders from 30 different denominations and networks gathered in Austin, Texas to deal with this very topic. And so one of the times that they had together, they began to make a list of reasons why pastors don't engage in relationships and don't resource one another and help each other. And the top two reasons they came up with was comparisons and insecurities. And I want to talk to you about that for just a minute, about really the negative impact that our insecurities can have in our lives and in our ministry. Several years ago, God took me down a path in our local church of discovery, really just how damaging our insecurities can be. The Bible tells us in Genesis 1 and 2 that God created humanity in His image and His likeness. Psalm 8 describes it this way: who is man that you're mindful of him, that you've made him just a little bit lower than the angels? And listen to this language, that you've crowned him with glory and honor. That word crown doesn't mean God just hadn't set glory and honor on his head, but it means to completely clothe, to blanket. You've blanketed humanity with your glory and honor. We know what happens in Genesis 3. Sin enters the world. And what happens immediately is that glory and honor lifts. It's gone. So the first effect of sin that humanity felt was insecurity. And we've been fighting it ever since. Guys, I believe this. I believe our insecurities are the greatest weapon and the greatest tool that hell leverages against us to destroy our families, to destroy our marriages, to destroy our churches, our ministries, and even our own emotional health. I believe there's nothing that he leverages more and uses more successfully than our insecurities that we give him to use against us. So how do insecurities flesh out in the ministry context? There's a lot of different ways. Everything from not wanting to develop a team because you want to be the hero of everybody's story, or not confronting difficult situations that need confrontation, or not bringing correction to your team because you're worried they'll get mad and they'll leave you. Or how about overcompensating and always having to be the center of everything? Another way I've seen insecurities manifest is when we need affirmation. And so what we do is we go over the top in all kinds of ways. Why? Because if I can minister to people in an over-the-top way, then they'll medicate my insecurities and then they'll tell me how great I am. But the problem with that is now we have a mixture of ministry with manipulation. And it's all because of our insecurities. So guys, what I want to encourage us to do is to begin to work through those insecurities and move beyond those insecurities. And how do we do that? And where does that start? That starts by being willing to be vulnerable, by being willing to just kind of empty ourselves in a way and to come together with other pastors and leaders in a way to where we can be honest, we can have genuine, authentic relationships, we can celebrate our successes, and we can have people to help us work through when maybe things aren't going so well. It's emptying ourselves of everything we think we have figured out to come to the table and say, you know what, guys, I just need help. Can you help me? And then it's working together as brothers and family to lift one another up and encourage one another, because, guys, one of the main ways we have to confront our insecurities is with the help of other people. And so, guys, I'm excited about HGM and what HGM has to offer us in the areas of relationships. And guys, we don't have to do it alone. We don't have to be isolated. We can have life-giving relationships with other pastors and leaders, resourcing, learning, not just learning how to build a team and to develop our own leadership skills, but gleaning from the grace on one another's lives. And lastly, seeing God-given, God-breathed results. Because listen, guys, we're better together. And I believe as we come together, we will all together begin to accomplish what God's put in our hearts. Guys, we love you and we believe you. Thanks for checking out the video.